Okay, moving on, sound design. This is something that I take a lot of time over and I think about a lot, so I've kind of written out some stuff to talk about here. Contrast, this is the big thing when you're picking sounds to make in any track, I think. Every day before I get working, I spend half an hour picking out a whole folder of sounds. I might not use them all, but what I'm looking for is something really different from the last sound that I picked. So I pick a sound and I'm going to look for the opposite of that sound. Like if I found a short, stabby sound, now I'm going to look for a long, stringy sound. And if it was a really bassy sound, I'm going to look for a trebly sound. And these are all the different types of contrast you could think about. Fast and slow, high and low, left and right, up and down, near and far. These are all things that you can actually translate from visual things into audio if you think about it. And I will go through later on in the mixing section and try and go on a bit about space and how to get that. But I think we're going to go back to Cubase now and I'll show you some of the sounds that I was making for this song and how I went about them. So let's have a look here. Get rid of all of them again. And I think I'll do some baby. Right, the first sounds that I've made to go along with my track is this kind of mentasm-y thing, and it was made with a soft synth, but then I bounced it down because it was kind of ordinary, and I ran it through a bunch of plugins. I think I've left them up in here so we can have a look. That is a chorus. That chorus there, very simple, stop box one. Then we've got Trash, which is just the best distortion plugin ever. Like, have about that, you can do the most crazy things. And then I've cut the bottom and the top off it, so let's have a listen to that sound now. A bit ordinary on its own, a little bit, but if you hear it with the bass line, hopefully. Yeah, the next thing I've made is a string, and I've done that in Contact, sorry. It's quite simple. I've just taken a string out of a song that I like, and I've looped it in here, made it all smooth, which is something you really need to get to know how to do. Let's have a look at it here. It's got a cross-faded loop on it, and it is just going to keep the string going forever and ever, which let's see if I can get it to play back. Where are we? Oh yeah, some octaves up. There we go. And it's sounding really nice and luscious because it's got this chorus on it. Simple chorus in there. No, it's not amazing, but it's good. It really helps. I put a cut-off, a low-pass filter cut-off, which is sent here to this LFO. And then I've actually set the LFO speed of one of my controllers, so you can see it moving there. So and get and that gives you some nice movement, so you can sort of vary it throughout the track, get something a bit more sort of useful. Well, let's get rid of Contact for a minute over here. So I've made one thing I really like doing to start a track off is just put a hi-hat in and then just grab a piece of an old record and just stick it in one bar loop and try and get some kind of atmosphere going in the track before I even start. This is an example of something. Sorry, I turn the drums off here. So yeah. Alright, so then I kind of thought, no, hell with it, that's all quite nice and tuneful. So I decided to go a bit of a different way. Let's have a look here. Kind of created a little arrangement to this whole thing for you to listen to. this is just really rough, but it shows you how the whole thing could build up just for starters. So, gone for a bit of a darker feel. So the way I did that was just by popping a little automation on to turn off that subgroup that I made with it's muted now. So that way I can kind of just have sub when I want it, I can have noisy bass when I want it. And then those two, so the final word on this, those two groups are now sent to a third group, and they're all glued together with a camel fat and the fab filter. I believe that's taking off the, oh no, there's some unsightly frequency that was annoying me, so I just dipped it out. This is pretty much the only time I use an EQ, to be honest with you. It's just to cut out an odd frequency which I don't like, or maybe cut the bottom off. But I certainly never use it in a positive way in a computer. I just absolutely hate every single EQ plugin out there. Hate them all universally. I think they're rubbish. I've owned some good analog EQs. They were great. They were really useful. I've never found a plug-in EQ that does anything useful apart from destroy your signal. So I try and avoid all of that, and I go for picking the right sound. I think that's something that Drake said, that it's much better to pick the right sound from the start than it is to try and repair it using EQs. If it's not bright enough, say the snare's not bright enough, pick another snare that's brighter rather than trying to fix one with an EQ. I think, especially with these EQs where you can make a million bands in it, every time you create one of these little things, it's running another algorithm and you're getting these phasing issues when they're adding them all back together again. It's basically cutting out that strip of audio, turning it down, and then adding it back to the original signal. And even however accurate they are, there's going to be all these points where they just don't join together properly. And you're going to get all these weird dips in the frequency. So personally, I just avoid, apart from high and low cuts, which I've shown you, I avoid using EQs if possible. There is one I like, the Waves one. I think I've got it on the snare over here. Well, it's turned off right now, but this one, I have actually used it with good results. That pretty much, you can see it's adding a bit of weight to the bottom of the snare there if I wanted it. But other than that, I don't really use any EQs at all. I just find much better ways to do it. Okay, this effect sends, they're all just reverb sends right here. This is a really short ambient reverb, and it's basically just been sent to a lot of the drums to give the drums a bit of space. They're all mono samples, so it's going to be very much down the middle. So this is just going to widen out the top, and I've actually cut the bottom off of the reverb, wherever it is over here. I've high-passed it with this REQ, so that it's just reverbing only from the middle upwards. So again, I'm not making any stereo in the bottom end of the track. I'm going to explain why in a minute, hopefully, if we get there. Let's pop back to my notes. This thing, I've got a terrible memory, so this is helping me to remember what to talk about. Right, modulation. This is something, if you really want to make unique sounds and you really want to make unique bass, it's much better to learn how to move this wheel around and the pitch wheel and some of these knobs really well than it is to go draw graphs in a computer. You know, music is like a human experience, and the more linear and the more obvious something is like made, you know, perfectly straight, the less it's actually interesting. So even if you're just doing a rising filter, recording it yourself is much better than drawing just a straight line graph, in my opinion. I'm going to give you one example of just using a really simple straight line graph, and then hopefully show you what you can do if you do it by hand. Right, this first thing, this is a clip of the bass, which is in a track called Long Stay, coming out on our next Ed Rush and Optical album, which will be out in September. So I'm giving you a little bit of a blast of this. Let's have a clip. So let's have a look at this. Is just the one bass mid track here, and how the actual this is how to see how it sounds. That build up there, you can see what I've done. Basically, what these graphs are controlling, this bottom one is controlling this here in the bandpass filter, and the top one is controlling this height here. So it's going to start off really thin and move down, become really bassy, and then slowly open up to the full track. And that's a really good way of kind of building up to something by messing with all the frequencies, picking a few bits out, and then opening out to the full sound. So hopefully you can hear that now. Now you can watch it on there as well. You can see it coming down here, following that graph there. But it's what it's doing really. It's quite a simple trick, but it's really helpful. You know, it's gone totally sub because I've cut the top off and gone right down to the bottom with the low pass. Now it's starting to open out again. This is like my very own bandpass filter. I can change the width of it however much I want, you know. Now it's opened out to the full bass channel. So you can see that's all made out of one sample. I've got mid-range bass and bottom end and control over all of them, all just using this single bandpass filter. So it's a nice trick there. Right, but the more interesting way of doing it, and the way that I do most bass sounds, is to record the mod wheel. So getting good at a mod wheel is really important. Let's just skip on to the next one. This here is that bass I was just showing you in my song here. And up the top there is the graph of the recording of the modulation I've done. And you can see, look at the shapes in it, right? You're not going to be able to sit there and program all these little shapes in here by hand. It'll be a total nightmare. And if you wanted to get them with an LFO, I mean, imagine the hours of programming you'd have to do to make the variations in this. Whereas all I've done is sat there and just gone one recording over the top, and I've got all these different things. So let's have a quick listen. I mean, it's not the best example of this, but this is, I'm trying to show you how I work to get bass sounds to be unique, sort of thing. So. Okay, so lots of variation in there. That was 4 hours of programming if you did it by hand with drawing it in, or it took the length of that recording to actually put it in, and I just did it by hand. Down here you can see it's controlling the cut-off. It's a really simple thing, but basically if you work every single track by hand like that, you're going to end up something that's a lot more human, a lot more sort of interesting to the ear, and no one's ever going to be able to accuse you of copying or sampling. Even if you're using samples from someone else's track, you're making it your own, you know, you're doing something unique that no one else can just copy the next day, because it's all your handiwork and the way you move and stuff. So you've got to put a human input into a lot of this programming, you know, because otherwise you start following the numbers a lot, you know, you can really just become very robotic, and that's not interesting, you know, it's not what we're looking for in music. You know, it's an art form, so you want to make it artistic. Okay, so I think I've gone into that now. Arranging and songwriting. Right, you're going to have to bear with me now, because I'm going to switch over to Studio One. And I don't think these two. Right, I'm just going to load up Long Stay. I actually was playing you that clip just then. I'm going to actually load the whole song, the finished final song, so we can go through a bit about how myself and Ed Rush work on an actual track. Oh, apparently it's going to work. Feel free to shout out questions, by the way, don't be scared, because we can use up some of this time here. Here we go. Right, fantastic. That looks like it.
Some of those hats you put in, you've not high-passed them.
No, I mean, you know what? I mean, a lot of people, Break was right about eating up the low energy. You really do need to do that. And also, let's talk quickly about the way I would have done it in the analog days. I used to run all my drums to a bus on a desk, and then that bus left and went off into my rack, and my rack was basically this Focusrite analog green EQ. Pretty much that was all I had in it. Sometimes I'd run it through the compressor as well, but to be honest, I hate compressors too. There's no need for compressors really. You can just go and draw the volume shapes into everything the way you want, and they'll play back exactly the same every time. Whereas if you run a compressor on something, every other bar it'll decide we want to do something different than I did the last bar. I don't know why, but even in a computer, it's basically an algorithm. It's bollocks. One time the kick sounds really good, the next bar is gone, and you're like switching on, and I'm trying to chase it. And like the reality is, like, if you need the shape, you can draw that shape with an envelope. You can take it into a wave editor and change the shape of it. If there's too much bass or something, you can maybe squash or draw that frequency out. Like Break Radio can draw a frequency. It's pretty much better way than really using lots of compressors, especially with drum beats. If you think, there's not enough life in my drum beat, what it often is you've got to kind of like make the hats drop down low and there's a kick or a snare, because you want lots of clarity in the kick and the snare. But then in between those points, you want the hats to be riding up. That's what a compressor will do. Every time there's a kick or a snare, it'll turn everything down. And when it opens out again, the in-between bits, the hats are going to get much louder. So you're going to get like a lot more life in the beat, but you could just go and turn those hats up. For physically the volume in your door, you get exactly the same result, but perfect every time, and not unpredictable. So that's something really worthwhile looking at. Right, now I'm getting into arrangement here. This is the finished song for Long Stay. I'm just going to open up the drum folder. Should we have a little bit of a listen to it first, I guess, so you know what we're talking about, and we can find out if it's actually.
Slip through your splinter cell, administer the compound. No fixation, leave you sick with the viral sound. Killdozer while I hit you all at point blank. Mystery machine, hidden heavy as a Sherman tank. Why you better chill when we get ill. Why white lightning, smack the creep sand. Leave them with the chill, hear the rock babies. Up in my flight path, I go mad crazy. Flying serums that hit the Pac-Man who rocks the house. Take it from the top to the pod jam. Up in the fast lane, the curb crawler. Bleed, bleed in my brain, I had to call her. Take it to Zardos, up inside the satellites. Malfunction, function, naked luncheon. Up in my capsule, take it to the wormhole. Realize that you and I were reaching the goal.
Have a little run through this. I think one thing to say about this track, you can probably notice straight away, is that the timing of it is not bang on computer 16ths. We use the grid a bit, but not too bothered about the grid, as long as the snares are kind of lined up okay. Maybe the front kick. Everything else is kind of open to interpretation about where it should go. So to get this swing, I didn't really you can use computer swing, like percentage swing, as a quantized preset, but I prefer to just go in and delay by hand. So what we've done here is we've gone in and we've kind of, oops, let's not move that, we're in the whole song. That's the problem with learning too many programs. So what we've done, especially with the bass line, I think this is all bounced down now, but let's have a quick look at it. I took my hits in the bass like I normally would. I showed you before, recorded them. And what we've done, I mean, I think even here you can kind of see, it'll let me, not quite on the front here, that's sort of in the middle of where it probably should be, that one there, that's the quantized line there, and it's just happening wherever it likes. What we did is we sat around taking bits of bass and doing that crossfade trick I showed you, moving them around in time so they have to swing. And even if they were like overlapping each other with a horrible straight line cut, and we're just doing a crossfade to glue it all back into one track. Look, no funky bits anywhere. Every note is going into every other note. You know, these are all separate samples, these pieces here, but they've been put back together and then kind of reconstituted. So they have a really nice smooth sound to them. And this is something you could never do in a sampler back in the day. You just had to basically use envelopes to try and never let two basses cross over each other. But like with this amazing technology we've got now, you can literally just make it all absolutely perfect. So that's quite a cool thing now to have the crossfade loops. So we can have a listen to that on its own maybe. Oh, that's the bass end of it. So let's have a quick look at that channel there. Pretty much this has been distorted in pre-production, you know, like we do a lot of what Charlie was talking about. We'll spend a whole day just sitting there with a couple of synths, making hours of bass sounds. Probably 90% of them you can't use, you know, they just sound impressive, but then when you go in the track they're not that useful. But the ones you do come up with, I mean, like some of my most favourite basses that I've made have been made that way. I know the Shape the Future bass and Alien Girl bass and all those things were made with either an Ovation bass station or this Pro 1 that's acting up today. And just recorded into a DAT machine at the time or now into a computer, chopped up, moved around till I like the groove of it all roughly at first, and then when I like the way it's moving around, I'll go in and I'll remove all the funny clicks and pops of them overlapping and try and glue it all together and make it seamless and look like one neat audio file like this does. I've pretty much been through it and fine-tooth comb. That's the bass line. Here the drums, I mean, like it's very similar to what I showed you before. This ride break here, wherever it is, let's find it, is just a sampler with the ride break cut up and it's in MIDI. So there's a combination of audio and MIDI in this track, and that's pretty much how we make most things. You use one. I use audio if I know I'm not going to want to shape something or put filters on it that are in time. The most clear playback of an audio file I find is just to drop it straight into the DAW on a channel rather than have it in the sampler. The sampler is an extra layer of algorithm and slightly less fidelity, but it gives you a lot of control. Like when I was building that bass line earlier on, you know, I could have all my envelopes exactly on the front of the notes and a lot more integration with all the controls. But if I'm just playing back a kick drum or that's a crash there, just to play back, I'll just drop it in, you know, like it's quick and easy, isn't it? Dropping stuff into a DAW. I think going through this drum track is going to be very similar to the one I went through before, so I want to talk about some other stuff, and I know I'm probably running out of time, so I'm going to just go over to my...
15 minutes, man.
Okay, alright, well that's good, because I've got a few more things I want to talk about, so let's move on with this lovely PowerPoint presentation. We've been all through that, so mixing. It's like a bowl of salad, I decided, some drunken night earlier in the week, so I made this picture. Why? I can't remember why. Okay. No. Because I have absolutely no clue about mixing, and I don't think anyone does. I swear to God, one day you think you're a genius, and you wake up the next day and you're totally not. You know, you've made the best track ever, and your mate's going to be so jealous when you play it in the morning. Then you put it on, and it's like, oh. The hell, I don't know anything. So, yeah, it's electronics plus salad plus voodoo equals a mixing. I don't know. So, all right, that's a bit cheeky because I do. But all right, so a wall of sound has no meaning. That means if you can ram every frequency up to the top, which I know like some 20-year-old producers like to do, just like max everything, and we'll just have a total like blank waveforms at the top and no up and down. Eventually, when you go and play that in a club, one of my tracks is going to come through and just like run through it like a steam train with a bit of dynamic. So basically, yeah, just flatlining everything and having everything up loud. It might sort of be pleasing for a minute, but down the line, it's not really going to sound good. So you're really looking to create shapes, you know, the dynamics and frequency response and changes of bass and treble, and you want to see the, you know, in the spectrograph I showed you the orange and purple thing. Oops, that's jumping for me. You know, you want to see shapes in that. I mean, literally shapes. You know, things going up and down, etc., etc. Let me try and put that back to you. Okay, so right, understanding space in mixing. You've got space, and you need to use it up. So I've made some funky diagrams here. You can laugh at them, it's fine. They're supposed to be for myself and 5-year-olds to understand space. So here we go. That's your frequency, there's time, and there's volume there. So this kind of creates a box that you can put your track in here. This is, I came up with this when I was drunk the other day. It's a sand sculpture in a bottle. But it kind of explains a bit about mixing that I think is a good thing to imagine. This palm tree is my kick drum here, and this red thing it used to be C, that it's like my bass line, and this fish here is like a stab. I don't know. You can make up your own ideas here, but the more I fill up the bottle with stuff, the less room I've got, and slowly when I get to the very top I reach the ceiling and I can't add anymore and I'm stuck where the plug is. So I've only got that space to act in, so I want to use it wisely, you know, like I want to leave a nice big space for these big things like kick drums and snares, but I also want to like leave space in my mix around for all these other things to go on. And when I'm reaching the edges here and I'm running out of space, or maybe I'll start digging away at some other things, I really don't want to destroy the strong parts of it. Try and leave them as like the building blocks, and then all the details can go around the outside. So that's just an analogy, but you know, obviously it's helpful to think about. Now this is something that I think Charlie touched on, but I'm going to try and explain to you what it's all about. Yes, you want to have mono bass end in your mix for cutting onto a lathe, but to be honest, not a lot of people are making tunes for vinyl anymore. But there's a very good reason why you still want to have mono bass. Let's look at this. If we've got a stereo stack of speakers in here, and both bass speakers are moving at the same time, they're pushing the maximum amount of air at you that they possibly can be. They're pushing forward at the same time, they're pushing back at the same time. So if you want a nice loud bottom end, you want them to both be moving at the same time. Let's look what happens when they become stereo bass. One is pushing while the other one's pulling, and sometimes that pushing and pulling can actually just cancel each other out. Sometimes they're going forward at exactly the same moment, so that's going to come out really loud. So what you're going to get is some bass notes are going to disappear, other ones are going to be way too loud, it's going to keep coming and going, you're going to get phasing as they cancel each other out, as the waves cross over each other. So you're going to get all kinds of problems from the stereo bass, not just from cutting it on the record, but from playing it back on any system. Your speakers at home, but especially on a very loud system where you're hoping that bass notes are going to come out. You wouldn't want a track where like every other 7th bass note, believe me, it won't be every 4th one, like something even. It will be something just you can't predict, you know, it will just disappear, and then every other 9th one is just way too loud. You know, that is the reason why. So what you do is, let's try and pause this for a minute and think about it. Oh, that's a good place to stop actually. This big wave is going to be the way the bottom speakers move. This little wave here is going to be the way the top speakers move. Now, if the top end is out of phase or is moving differently on either side, you can see this movement here is not very big, so it doesn't really matter that they're doing different things like that because they're only moving a little bit. They're not going to create like really big disparity between loud and quiet, even if they do phase and cancel out, so that's fine. But look what happens when these two, one's forward and one's backwards in the bass end. If we lined up these two things here so that they look the same, that would be mono in the bass end. But it doesn't matter if this is all stereo. It's not big enough to affect the overall power of the bottom end. And all the power of a mix is coming from the bottom end, and down from 400 down to the bottom. That's where a lot of the power and the weight of any track is coming from. So that's why you want to have mono below 400. You can do pretty much what you like above that, because you can see this, the shapes you're going to create. They might be different from here to here, but that's not going to make an awful lot of difference to the level of the playback in the track. So, right, moving on. That's obviously stereo response, I played that. Right, okay, foreground, background and pan. Let's think about it this way. Left and right is like 2 directions, and back and forth is like 2 directions, and volume is 2 directions. So we're creating that cube again in space, you know? Front to the back, left to right, loud and quiet. So we're getting our cube, we can fill it and move things around in it. So just a quick tip, when you're trying to make something sound far away, that's your original noise there. And this is a reverb that you add to it. And the original noise is quiet because it's far away. And the reverb is big and long because it's far. That's what would happen to you like in real life. If I went off over there, started shouting at you, my voice would be very tiny, but you could hear all the reverb in the room coming. And as I got closer to you, my voice would get a lot louder, and the room would become a lot less significant to the sound, you know. So then right up in your face, you need to take it off and have it completely dry. So this is a way of getting something to sound front to back, using a reverb or some kind of ambient noise. All right, ears. This is my ear diagram. And basically what this is trying to explain is you're hearing, wherever you're moving around, you're getting the sound coming at you. It's always going to arrive at your 2 ears at a slightly different time. And basically that kind of gives you a sense of where something is, you know, 3D positioning. By how the difference between one ear and the other is how you tell whether it's coming from over there or over there. So if you want to put something in a mix and kind of trick people into thinking it's moving around, you can take the left and the right waveforms and you can just slightly move them in time like that. And this is a fraction of a millisecond I'm talking about here, but this slight movement, if you can take the left and right sides and delay them with each other, will make it sound like it's coming from over there or over there. So you're not even using an effect, but you're actually creating a way of making space. It's not a reverb or any other thing, it's just actually more simulating what real life is about. So that gives you an extra trick as far as all these, you use reverbs for depth and less for being at the front, and you can also phase the waveforms left and right, backwards and forwards against each other, and that will give you space as well, you know. So I used to have the program for a 4D studio once, and it is an absolute minefield when you start adding 4 speakers instead of 2, so I had to learn an awful lot about this. And without going into too much detail, it's a really good trick for fall in the ear. Alright, so moving on. Okay, this is that bass sound from my song. Unfortunately, it's not a very hi-fi picture here because I wish it was. You can basically what you can see here. In fact, I think I've got it a bit bigger. Let's have a look. Yeah, here we go. Okay, you can see that spike there. You can see these spikes here. I hope you can see them. You can see the core of the bass. That's the main sort of weight of it there. And these things are kind of like all the fronts of the little notes I made, and they're popping out all over the place. So I want that to be a much more even response in my final track than that. That looks kind of very spiky. It's going to cause issues with those things sticking out. So what I do is I've run it out of the desk and through my EQ with just a bit of drive. No EQ on, I've just used the gain in it, and it's something that I like to do. But you can use anything. And you can buy a tape deck and do it. I mean, it might sound crappy, but you know, it's the principle. That's how I started out learning about this stuff, was cranking up my cassette deck really loud, just recording it absolute maximum, play it back and seeing what happened to it, you know. So here is the, hopefully this is just the unprocessed bass. So this is it after it's run through my EQ. Now what can we see? Well, it looks like it got a lot louder. It did get a bit louder, but honestly I haven't changed the overall volume of it. The peaks of the whole sample are still exactly like they were level-wise from the last one. Well, what it's done is it's gone along knocking off all those little spiky lumps at the beginning of each note. And the overall sort of sound of it now is much fatter. Let's have a listen. same peak level, so I can put it in the track at the same volume as the last one, but it's going to end up sounding a good 3-4 decibels louder without actually turning up the level of the track. So, I mean, this is what saturation really is all about. You know, it's a term that's bandied around a lot, and I think a lot of people don't really understand it. It's a kind of, sort of a compression, but what it's doing is it's not reacting to one of these lumps and then trying to turn down afterwards. It's just, every shape in here is still exactly the same. It's just these little spiky bits that have gone. Been knocked off by the fact that in the EQ, it just literally can't respond any higher to this peak. So it doesn't, and in a computer, if you just jam it up loud and turn it back down again, it will flatten that out, but it's going to be just those square shapes that speakers don't like. You know, this is actually, I wish there was slightly more resolution, but this lump has actually got a nice rounded shape to it still, even though it's been cut off, it still has a nice shape. And so that's something that the speaker will be able to recreate much better than if it was just square cut off on this, which is what digital distortion basically ends up being. Very square. I mean, you know, I think way back when I showed you that original waveform all completely maxed out, you can see how square it gets in the end. There's a lot of these square tops on it, something that's been rammed so high up. Speakers are never going to play that back. They're struggling, they won't sound sweet, they'll destroy a lot of the space. And you can get just as much volume by doing it this way. So this is the EQ this is done through. I bet you can pick it up for about 30 quid online, you know, second hand. It's not an expensive or high end bit of gear. It's just a simple way of making something louder. Right, so moving on. Clarity is something that's really difficult. I think for me it's the hardest part of mixing. And we've been through all the space and how to look at your frequencies, and really clarity boils down to each sound has to sit in its own area in terms of the space in the mix and also in space and frequency where it lies on the frequency spectrum. So you want to kind of set, like, you know, kick drum needs to fit in that 100 hertz bit because the bass is at 40 hertz, so they're like talking to each other like that, but they're in their own space, you know. So everything needs to be put into an area where its strongest point is, you know, in a mix. So say it's a kick drum, I've just explained it. Maybe it's a stab sound and you just want it to be mid-range and no top end. Maybe it's a hi-hat, you want it to be nice and toppy, but you want to get it to sit in its own space, you know, and remove every aspect of it that's not meant to be in a mix. So that's like the high-pass filtering to get rid of the bass on everything. That's part of that, you know, just cleaning out the frequencies where you know it wouldn't be there. If it's a hi-hat, it really shouldn't have a bass line in it, should it? So you'd use a high-pass filter to get rid of it. Absolute perfect mixing theory in a computer, I've realised. If you want to take a piece of audio and have it so it's not affected by the fact that it's in the digital realm at all, then you really need to stick to that law there. -6 decibels peak, so that's the highest part, and that's the peak at -6 decibels, and the overall power level needs to be -18 decibels, which is, it's kind of weird because in all these doors you get your like fader volume. And you're thinking, why, when I've set it to -6 and -18, am I only using up like tiny amount of that whole readout there? Why have they given me all this giant space to fill up, showing me the level of the track, and then I'm really only using that? Well, that's another reason you need to ask Mr. Steinberg, because I don't know why they've designed these doors to read out like that. The top half of your volume display on a channel is really relatively useless if you don't want to have any distortion. You have to have everything down so low in a computer mix. I'm not still quite sure why that is, but it is actually necessary to start with all your individual channels at a really kind of nice, well-controlled low level with huge amount of headroom, and then go into the master bus finally and just drive it all up. That's where you get the volume, right at the end, not at the beginning. So, and this is something that a lot of people do. Just too much of everything, too many effects, too much stereo. Too much stereo is the biggest thing that's wrong with a lot of mixes right now, because you can just put all the CMX and things like that, you know, you can just widen it out forever, even more wide and wider again, and then it starts seeming like you're listening to two different songs on two different sets of speakers, you know. So I'm a big fan of mono. I think having a mix that sounds really good in mono is the best mix ever. But it's a little boring to the ear, so you obviously can't just do that. But anyway, so perfect isn't always better. Now, the reason I say that is getting everything clean and clear is great, but when it comes to having an exciting track, if you're gonna move things around and the odd time it's going to distort a load just in one or two places, then that doesn't matter if it happens once or twice. You can't be too anal about mixing down. If the overall effect of what you're doing is good and you like it, then it's better to leave in imperfection than driving it out, because the more you keep working to get that last little niggly thing out of the track, the more you're probably going to destroy the flavour of that track. And not only that, you're going to become so bored with your song that you'll just, it's like saying the same word over and over and over and over. Eventually it just completely loses meaning. And so working on a track for too long and finding out all the imperfections will actually lead to something that sounds pretty stale in the end. It's better to work quickly, get something bold and brave. That's really very important, you know. When you present something, you want it to shout out at you, you want it to jump out, you don't want it to be just tired. And, you know, some amazingly well-produced tracks are actually boring to listen to, so. Right, and
last couple of minutes, Matt.
How long?
Last couple of minutes.
2 minutes,
yeah.
Alright, well I'm on my last bit here. Basic rules, I've just discussed that. You don't want to get rid of no digital distortion, no dynamic distortion, just playing back whatever you've recorded, then those are the rules. And finally, the two files I sent to Bo, I will always send him a completely mashed up one that I've just driven through my master bus to breaking point. Because I find that, you know, it's a good thing, but mastering engineers, they want to make things sound nice and better, that's their job. But sometimes to play out in a club, you just want it to be banging loud. You don't care about their, like, oh, it's perfect kind of thing. So I send him a nice, clean, lots of headroom file, which he can work with. But I send him the one that's kind of like, this is what you're aiming for. I don't mind if you crush my track as much as this, because this is what I'm after kind of thing. So at least he's got an idea then of what I'm after, because I've sent tracks off to people, really clean ones, and told them, yeah, ram it up, I'm going to play it on Saturday night, and then I put it on and it's half the volume of the one I made straight out of my computer, and I feel really let down. So they've probably done an amazing job, made it really high fidelity and great in a lot of ways, but you know, Charlie started off with saying about the loudness wars and how they're killing sonics. Well, they are, but unfortunately this is where we're at the minute, and literally, could we all get a petition together and say we're all going to turn it down? I think lots of people have tried that and been totally ignored. All it takes is one guy to go, no, my track's going to be so loud, and we'll all go back to it again. So you know, it's better to learn how to deal with it at the minute. Well, Mr. Steinberg again, please just take away the invention of a clip limit at all. Let's have no ceiling whatsoever. It doesn't matter how loud you turn it up, there's more. Do you know what I mean? So they surely could get rid of that now, the zero ceiling, you know? So anyway, I think that's pretty much what I've got for you. Let's see, I'm back to this. Hopefully you've got some tips off of me, but hopefully you're going to ignore some of them and do the opposite and go, you know what, you told me to do this and check this out, it's loads better. So yeah, if you've got any questions, fire away. I think we're...